Hey, everybody out there. Welcome to the Complete Solution Group podcast. We have a really exciting guest on today. John and I have been talking about inviting people onto the show that have been in law enforcement in the 80s and 90s, kind of to give a background effect of how law enforcement was back then and how the border situation really hasn't changed that much. The numbers may have changed, but the dangers have always been the same down there. So today we have Kevin Jarvis on. Kevin's a Marine, served in the Marine Corps throughout the 70s, got on with the U.S. Border Patrol in the 80s, moved up to a U.S. immigration inspector and then a special agent, and then retired as a group supervisor in Boston. So, this is going to be a really interesting show. He's got a lot of great input, a lot of great background, and some unbelievable stories of that era. So this is going to be a great show. All right, Martinez, kick it off.
All right, thanks, Fab. Kevin, first off, thanks for your service for when you started off your career, and then also, today's National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. So for all those officers that are listening, thank you to the men and women that keep us safe all day around. And on that note, Kevin, just looking at your bio here, I mean, you have an extensive career and you've done so many great things. And I think that's something that Fab focus on. Nowadays, you hear in the news, everything's either in Lukeville, Arizona or in Eagle Pass. And Fab and I spent, a few weeks down there in Lukeville to really kind of get the sense of what's going on. The border's not what you and I were accustomed to. And Fab did a detail down to New Mexico. So Fab's familiar with the border area. And it'll just be really interesting to hear your perspective on how it was back, when you started off in the early 80s to now. But like I said, with every great story starts with a great beginning. And Kevin, on that note, I'll turn it over to you. And again, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you inviting me, and I'm glad you're doing something like this. There's a lot of stories out there, and what's going on at the border now is kind of heartbreaking to us little guys. Like you say, I joined the Border Patrol in 1980. Back in the old days, I think there were about 2,900 of us, maybe 3,000. And we were arresting like 1 million a year, believe it or not. And to put it in perspective, I think they have 30,000 Border Patrol agents now. And, they're getting, the people crossing are incredible, but the arrests aren't there because they're not allowed to do their job. And that's sad because I watch the news every night. I see what's going on. I know what's going on. I've lived in a couple of different countries in Central America, South America, Africa. My wife's an immigrant. I have cousins in Mexico and Canada. I know what the world is like, and I know why they're coming. But of course, everybody now is claiming political asylum to the nth degree. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I always tell people, when I worked in Miami, I would see people claim asylum. Yeah, they were economic refugees. They were coming to work. They eventually admitted it. But they would also, first thing they did, as soon as they got adjusted status or got a transportation letter, or I think it was a 512, advanced parole, to go home and visit while their application was pending, they would go to the land of persecution the minute they got their green card or permission. But if we were to deport them back there, they claimed they would have been executed at the airport when they got off the plane. So, how many times can you hear this story and see it over and over again? And, the credibility factor is, I would say maybe 5% of the people applying for asylum are probably legitimate. The rest of them are just beating the system, and they're beating it bad now. And it's pretty sad. I'm just hoping things change, but I don't see any change. When I was down there in 1980, Jimmy Carter was getting out of office. Then 81, we had Ronald Reagan, probably the best president I've ever served under. And I didn't expect that, to be honest with you, the actor out of Hollywood. But he was a great president. Super sharp. Remember they used to say he was too old to be president? Well, I don't know if you remember. You probably do. They were completely wrong. I think we have someone in there now that's definitely too old and to be in president. And I took care of my dad with Alzheimer's for years. I see some similarities in the White House. And I'm not saying that as a joke. It's pretty sad. But the Border Patrol was great for me. When I was overseas in the Marines, I worked for the State Department at a couple of embassies, and I was able to work with guys like special agents from all these agencies, DEA, and these were high-level guys with good embassy posts, attaché jobs. CIA agents, high-ranking military officers. I was just a Marine sergeant. But everywhere we went, I was Kevin, they were Joe, Pete, Jim, whatever their name was, and we all got along great. And they taught me a lot, and they just pushed me to get into law enforcement. And Victor Dicus was our deputy chief of mission in Panama, and he goes, Kevin, would you like to be a special agent with the State Department? I go, yeah. But I only had like 12 credits. I was going to school. I had an associate's degree, but I was going to Florida State in the Canal Zone on weekends. And I got like 12 credits, 15 credits maybe the year or so I was there. And he goes, well, you got to get a bachelor's degree. You get the bachelor's degree to give me a call, because he was the head of diplomatic security for the State Department. His last tour was down in Panama. So getting to meet these guys, working with the government, being so hardworking and dedicated, I said, wow, that's a great job. I had never thought of being a police officer. I'd always done a lot of manual labor kind of stuff and factory work and things like that. But so I get out of the Marines, got the associates, and went in the Border Patrol because I went to take the state police exam in Massachusetts. And also the Customs Patrol and Border Patrol was one test together. I actually thought it was just the Border Patrol, just Customs Patrol, and then the Border Patrol called me, offered me the position. So I took it. 1980, 24 years old, off to Calexico, wherever that is. It's actually 100 miles east of San Diego on the border, about an hour west of Yuma, Arizona, for those that haven't been out there. It's a nice place to visit in the winter, but you don't want to be there in the summer. It was, I think, 115 degrees when I got my orders to Miami 5 years later. But it was a great job and great people. I met a lot of good people there. It was very difficult, too. As you know, the Border Patrol, you have to get through an 18-week. It was an 18-week academy then. And it was like 2 or 3 hours of Spanish in the afternoon on top of a regular police academy course of instruction. So it was really difficult. But I had learned a little Spanish in Panama and took 2 semesters in community college. So I was ready for the Spanish. And it's funny, I was halfway through the academy and I separated my shoulder, but they kept me because I had already maxed the physical fitness portion. So I would just run with everybody, but I couldn't do any pull-ups anymore for a few weeks. But I got to Calexico, hooked up with some great people. A lot of them to me were like cowboys, wore cowboy hats all the time, maybe to sleep for all I know. It was unbelievable. Great guys, and they were very helpful, and they trained me. They saw that I could do the job. I just had to learn the area, had to learn the basics. In your first year, you're on probation. And once you pass that 10-month exam, you got a job. So I told my wife, I met her overseas. She worked at a different embassy than I did. And then she transferred to New York. She was working for the Swiss Ambassador of the United Nations in New York. And she resigned because she couldn't be married to a foreign government employee while working for another government. So then we got married. She came out right after my 5.5-month exam. And I knew I was going to make the job. And if not, at least we had a visit to California. So working in the patrol, it was like in the old days, literally. I mean, we didn't have horses then. They brought more horses in later on. But we had ATVs, mostly Ram Chargers and things like that. We're all over the place. And I'm out there, a kid from Boston, and all I did was walk on concrete my whole life. And now I'm out there sign cutting in the desert, tracking aliens for miles on foot. And usually it was pretty good because there wasn't many places to hide out in the desert. But they'd come across at night, make it to Interstate 8, which wasn't that far from the border, and jump into load vehicles. And it wasn't unusual to pull a tractor trailer over with 100 aliens in the back. At 1 a.m, you're all alone. Because after you pass your 10-month exam, the first year you ride with a journeyman agent. Then after that, you're on your own. So I was out pulling cars over by myself, semis over. And luckily, you could depend on the California Highway Patrol and the local police to bail you out and get there to assist if you needed them before your own backup could come. Because we worked from, say, the Yuma, Arizona area out towards San Diego. We had about 100 miles of border. And we were lucky to maybe get 10 agents per shift. So sometimes there were 3 or 4 agents out there. And so we're out there all alone. But I guess you become fearless. I mean, some nights you're going, what am I doing out here? But you get the job done. And that was the training I got from the guys that were there before me. Taught me the ropes and, steered me in the right direction. One thing about
Yeah, Kevin,
yeah.
You brought up some good stuff, especially about like the asylum that you saw.
Mm.
We're seeing a huge problem with asylum now. Like you made the mention that you actually physically saw people that said they would have died if they went back to their country they were claiming asylum from, and then you saw them taking vacations to that same country the minute that they got their green card.
Yeah.
Like John and I have both worked for immigration. We've seen it. We've
Yeah.
seen the same thing, and we try to relay that to people that we talk to, just a basic person out there, and explain to them how bad the fraud is with asylum. Now I know also during that time, when Reagan came through, and after Reagan was leaving office, they had amnesty, and
Right.
Reagan even says it's one of the things that he regrets doing because of how much fraud came in through the SAW program and a lot of the other fraud that was there, even with the
Right.
amnesty. So how, what do you think about the asylum use now? How much fraud do you think that there is? I think over 80% of the cases are probably fraudulent, and you may think it's even higher.
I was going to say 90, but yeah, we're in the ballpark anyway. Yeah, it's all fraud. I mean, when I saw, I can't tell you how many people that I've seen out of Boston, Miami, and other locations. Where you going? Oh, I'm going back to El Salvador Christmas. Oh, okay. And you see they're an asylee, or they had a advanced parole, I-512, to go back. Sometimes they actually granted that while the application was pending, but most of the time they wouldn't do that because it would make the application null and void. And I'm thinking to myself, these people got a lot of nerve. Just, but they threw it right in our face, and maybe it wasn't intentional, but it felt that way. I'm going, what do you do? So yeah, I would say it's 90% fraud. There's clearly, because otherwise, the hundreds and thousands of people, I mean, I've arrested thousands, I've prosecuted hundreds, and that's no exaggeration. You do that in a 30-year career with immigration. And but none of those, if they were getting killed when we deported them back there, why are they back in Boston 2 weeks later after we deport them? So it just, but the average civilian doesn't get it. Of course, they're not exposed to it. They don't see the fraud. We're Americans. We want to be welcoming. We want to be friendly. We want to believe people, because we know we're the best country in the world, even during these crazy times like now. No other country can beat us. And I think the people that demonstrate throughout the United States at every time a leaf blows by and they have jump on some bandwagon, if they ever lived in a foreign country, they wouldn't be demonstrating and complaining about the United States.
Absolutely.
But they haven't. So they do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say asylum is just rife with fraud. Plus, marriage fraud. I would say 50% right off the bat fraud without even opening the file, looking at the case. You got these matches made in heaven with a 72-year-old woman and a 20-year-old guy that looks like he's right out of a magazine photo shoot or something. It's just ridiculous. I used to see that stuff.
I saw a lot of that in my career.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
And it's like, these people have nerve, but it's tough. I mean, exams is another issue. That's more the tail end of I went back as a contractor working with exams after I retired from ICE. I did that for a couple of years, and I dealt with a lot of marriage fraud. And some Americans, U.S. citizens, were filing 3 applications at a time for 3 different people from 3 different countries. And the situation, I mean, the agency was so overwhelmed with the applications, they wouldn't even pick it up on it because we were just getting into the technological age of computers and record keeping and things like that. It was just unbelievable. But Border Patrol, that was the best learning ground, I think, that anyone could have, especially for a career in immigration and customs enforcement, because you're just dealing with all these crazy issues, things you would never think you'd be dealing with on a daily basis, on a nightly basis, because it was shift work, morning, eve shift, midnight shift. And that was tough too. My first 15 years, I was doing shift work, like you guys did too, I'm sure. And that takes a toll on the family and your lifestyle and things like that. And then eventually I got the special agent job, which I thought would, at least it's day shift, and but it was 12-hour days, just like everything else, and weekends. But the Border Patrol, it's amazing that you'll have the port of entry, and then you'll have nothing for 100 miles on each side, maybe. So, but you have the Border Patrol. And the port of entry, the inspectors, they do a great job, but they're inundated with traffic. I mean, cars and trucks coming through, and there's hidden compartments. They work on these vehicles. The door panels are full of cocaine. And in those days, we weren't able to X-ray, semis and vehicles to see loads of packaged drugs in the vehicle. And I'm so grateful that all we got was cocaine and marijuana, that we didn't have fentanyl back then. Because I hear the horror stories and see the horror stories on the news every day with fentanyl. And why, it makes you wonder why you even have diplomatic relations with Mexico or China, for that matter, when you just think about that fentanyl issue and the amount of Americans dying on a daily basis.
Agreed.
And Kevin, just a question too, I think within the past 2 weeks, I know that they were finding IEDs, they were saying down there on the border that the Border Patrol agents now have to be worried about. And I was just, and then we all know for a fact there are terrorists that have come across in the past 2 to 3 years. I think the question that is the scary part is when these people are going to be activated to do whatever it is they're going to do. During your time there in the 80s, I mean, the cartels obviously were still up and coming. They're still doing their things. I mean, nowadays, you see on the border, I mean, it's getting violent. I think the week before Fab and I went down, they were actually blowtorching the hole in the fence on the Lukeville port of entry, and the Border Patrol agent went up there to put like baling wire to kind of stop it. And they were throwing rocks, in at the Border Patrol agent to get him away. I mean, the level of danger. And I think that's a lot of stuff that we don't see in the media, is that all you see is these people coming over, they're just giving up. But the violence, to me, in my opinion, has increased to a level that we haven't seen. And that's something, during my career, when I was in the Border Patrol for 9 years, and people were very hesitant to to even look at us the wrong way. And nowadays it's just out of control. I mean, back in the 80s, what was the level of I guess not violence, but I mean the safety? I mean, was it up there when you were patrolling?
Well, yeah. When I got to Miami, one thing is every day, or maybe 2-3 times a week, we get a busload of guys coming out of like California Institution for Men, Chino. They got deported. They did their 20 years for murder, or 10 years for this, and 5 years from that. Some of those guys, they wouldn't be in Mexico now and jump the fence again and start fighting with us. And they still had their T-shirt on, California Institution for Men. When we arrested them, they hadn't been in Mexico an hour or two since they were deported, and they were already over the fence. Those guys will fight, the hardcore criminals that just got deported. But you just never know when people are going to snap and turn on you. I mean, one day I was fighting with one guy, and he jumped on the fence. It was at the port of entry, and he was halfway up the fence, and I should have just let him go back, but I grabbed him, brought him down to cuff him, and he kicked me in the chest. And we had green uniforms, as you all know, but and I had a nice imprint of a boot print on my chest. He broke my ribs, and I'm dragging him to my vehicle, handcuffed, put him in my vehicle. A little old lady walking by the port of entry goes, "Don't you treat people like that? He's a human being." I go, "I'm standing there with a boot print on my chest with broken ribs." And this guy just had done this to me, but I was the bad guy because I'm in uniform, I'm carrying the badge. So, there's always two sides to every story, and I never forget that, the little old lady yelling at me. So, but clearly there is violence. I've been jumped by 5 or 10 aliens at one time, because again, we're out working alone, responding to sensors, and both ground sensors, infrared sensors, and call outs. So-and-so just saw someone cross at this location, and I'm out there. I don't know if I'm going to come across 2 people or 200 people, for that matter, and again, tractor trailers with 100 in them. It's not unusual to see that. And the poor things, they're just hardworking people trying to come here to work, and they wind up either suffocating or freezing to death, or it's so hot they expire from the heat exhaustion. And it's really sad. And Yeah. I mean, I arrested a Mexican cop once when I was in Calexico. He was smuggling a group of aliens. He was in civilian clothes. I had no idea. And I cuff him, and he had his duty weapon in the small of his back, like a 45 tucked in the small of his back. I take the gun out. I try to prosecute him, charge him with, possession of firearm, etc. Well, I get this from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Well, if we do that, then if you guys are in Mexico, they'll just grab you and maybe prosecute you. And I'm thinking to myself, so this guy got off scot-free because of the political issue. And, those things would happen because I wouldn't be in Mexico committing a crime, but someone there might recognize me because they're in my vehicle before or see me working in the courts doing prosecutions or whatever the case may be. And that was a political call that I wasn't too happy with. But those are the things that happen sometimes. You can't fight City Hall. You present your cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They accept or deny them. But I tell people that story, and they go, "What?" I go, "Yeah, I was bringing across a group of 20 and Mexican police officers. I had his badge, credentials, everything on him." But not to say we don't
It's
have any
ridiculous.
bad cops in the States. That happens too sometimes. But
Right.
you know, but
Yeah. So moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, moving out of the border patrol. So when and in the 80s when you went to Miami, I mean, John mentioned earlier, those early 80s in Miami were just incredible.
Yeah.
The cocaine wars that were going on.
Yeah.
A lot of the Cubans that were coming over.
Yeah.
Give us a little highlight of those early 80s in
Yes.
Miami.
So I went to Miami. I was still a border patrol agent. Most people don't know you have border patrol, even though we just had a seaport. That is a border. And we had the Mariel boat lift people from the early 1980s. And Castro just emptied his prisons. I mean, these were hardcore criminals, tattoos everywhere, stab wounds all over their body. They'd kill you in a heartbeat if you looked at them the wrong way. That's how difficult it was with some of these people. And the one thing is, once we got out of the Cubans, then the Colombians were taking over, and the Jamaicans too. Jamaicans were doing an awful lot of crime down there. I don't know how many guns we seized off Jamaicans, Intratec 9mm, and not just handguns. And believe it or not, on a slow day, I'd hang around gun stores, watch these guys go in their their brand new cars they just drove off a lot, buy a gun and walk out, and we'd arrest them and seize the gun. All you needed was a driver's license to buy a gun in Florida in those days, and lie on the ATF form. I'm a citizen of the United States. I've never been convicted of a crime, etc. And we knew this was going on. So some of those guns were brand new, never been fired. Put them into service use for undercover work sometimes. After we seized the vehicles as well. So, yeah, it was crazy. I was there. I'm going to say 6 or 8 months. I'm guessing. And I got there in 1985. They indicted, I believe, 1,200 City of Miami police officers. 1,200 City of Miami police officers for murder, drug dealing, money laundering, you name it. And that's what I walked into. So then, at that point, you feel like you can't trust your other fellow law enforcement officers. And luckily, that wasn't the case 95% of the time. But that was a real wake-up factor. And also, right around the time I got there, there was a bank robbery. A couple of guys came out all armored up. And I think they shot like 5 or 6 FBI agents. And the FBI agents at the time, some of them had automatic weapons, some had revolvers. They ran out of ammo. They threw him a magazine. The guy had a revolver, couldn't reload, of course. And that was a big wake-up call for law enforcement also as well. And so I was kind of in the middle of that stuff. And a lot of stowaways, a lot of, we'd have the Miami River. Boats would come up from Cuba and different places. Haiti, of course, loaded with Haitians. They'd come up with 100 people on a boat, barely fit them on the boat. They'd come right up the Miami River. They weren't inspected before they come up the Miami River. They come up and then get inspected on the river. But by that time, customs went down there. Everybody was already running up the streets. It was totally out of control. It was like, and they call it the cocaine cowboys, taking over. And in those days, they didn't have cell phones. So they walked around with these, the bags on the hip, on the belt, loaded with quarters, going from payphone to payphone to make their drug deals. Because they didn't have cell phones yet.
And Kevin, during that time, were you patrolling just in the Miami metro area, or were you going down to Marathon, down to the Keys? Were there agents down there, or did you guys just like hunker down in Miami itself?
We pretty much could. There was so much work we couldn't get out of Dade County, Miami, and Broward County, Fort Lauderdale area. Occasionally, we'd go over to Naples. I went down to Marathon, Key West area, maybe once. Marathon Key was my duty station if we were to have another Mariel boat lift, for instance, and I never really had to go down there. Yeah, there were boatloads of people coming in every day, but also on big shipping containers too. The container ships were loaded with stowaways, so we'd go down to these big container ships, and we'd have 20, 30 Dominicans diving off the ships into the water, and there's two of us trying to scoop them up. And the Haitians, they were coming in left and right. But other people get smuggled in too. They come through, Dominicans come through Puerto Rico and Yolas, the boats to, across Puerto Rico, and then the Dominicans wind up getting valid Puerto Rican identification. Obviously, doesn't belong to them, and because of the Spanish language and everything, they wind up coming to the States and getting U.S. passports and every benefit known to man that you and I never even knew existed. And that was a real wake-up call. But big metropolitan city like Miami, we arrested people from all over the world. Asians, Africans, Europeans. So. But of course, primarily it was a lot of Haitians, Jamaicans. Every time I arrested a Jamaican with a gun, I go, "Why you have a gun?" Well, because the Colombians might steal my dope or my money. And I get the same story from the Colombians about the Jamaicans. We just kind of shrug it off. It literally was craziest time of my life, I guess, as far as work goes. And there was plenty of it, so we weren't bored.
So seeing all that stuff that you saw through the 80s, coming up into Boston as a special agent, where do you see what's going wrong now? Like with Secretary Mayorkas, the job that he's doing, how this administration is handling the border. For someone like you who worked through a couple of different presidential administrations, saw what it's like to try to secure the border. Where do you see the big failure with this administration?
Well, as you well know, and a lot of people watching this may know or may not, but they always say we need to break the broken immigration system. Well, I don't know. Back years ago, we used to give 500,000 green cards a year. Then before I retired, I think they upped it to about 1 million a year. I think that's enough. But to fix a broken immigration system, all they really have to do is enforce the laws. They are not enforcing the laws. If they just enforce the laws on the books, we'd be back.
Absolutely.
We'd be back kind of with, a bit of control. I used to feel like when I worked as a special agent up in Boston, I actually felt like we had control over the illegal immigration issue in the Massachusetts area. And now it's just so that you get the same old song and dance. We have to fix the broken immigration system. The reason it's broken is because they're not enforcing the laws on the books. And that's Mayorkas' fault and the administration's fault. Not to say every administration is perfect, but this is the worst I've ever seen in my 67 years. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. It's something that Martinez and I have said multiple times on different shows that we've written about on different platforms. The immigration system's really not broken. They're just not enforcing the law. There's enough in the INA for us to go out there and make arrests and deport people and hold them responsible. This administration has just chosen not to enforce those laws.
Right. And one of the big factors that is kind of sad, because I used it to the nth degree, immigration detainers. Now I'm hearing you can't even put an immigration detainer, which that would be like a 72-hour hold that I can put on or have someone put on a criminal at a police station, a courthouse, or in a jail to hold them until we can pick them up, because maybe they're making bail this evening, but then it's Friday night, 11 o'clock. That's a typical thing. They'd come in to make bail thinking we wouldn't go there. Well, I would go, but then I was able to use my immigration detainer to place a hold on them for up to 72 hours and pick them up Monday morning on my way to work. And it worked out tremendously. I mean, I used that in every court system, every police department in Massachusetts, probably. And also I did it in Florida too, but more so up here because we only had 20 agents working the whole state of Massachusetts and New Hampshire on 9/11. We didn't have enough people to do the job, and but in every month, I mean, I wore every hat there was in immigration and ICE as far as immigration law enforcement. And the one thing is, every month I would get 1,200 names, a spreadsheet from the state of Massachusetts Criminal History Systems Board. And those 1,200 names were foreign-born individuals convicted of crimes in the state of Massachusetts for the month of, let's say, January. Obviously, the 20 of us can't get 1,200 people because most of these were released from prison or maybe awaiting sentencing or something. They took a time served perhaps or something. So I get 1,200 names. We go after the top 200 or 300, the high priority cases, the murderers, the rapists, the home invaders, the drug dealers, the child molesters. That actually I put them at top because I ran the sex offender unit too for a while. And those detainers were life-saving. They increased our stats, and it made for great liaison with these other law enforcement agencies, district attorneys' offices, police departments, court officers. They loved it because they didn't want to see these people walk out the door either, but their hands were tied. Yep. When they got my detainer, that meant they would be in held for a couple of days. And if they made bail $100 for beating their wife, I was going to hold them on a much higher bail than I would set back then. And they wouldn't see an immigration judge for maybe 5 or 6 days. They weren't going to be released the next day. And that saved a lot of women and children from being abused again and again. And it gave them time to move from that location. So the perpetrator, husband, boyfriend, next door neighbor, whoever was doing the dastardly deed, because it wasn't just the wives, they were beating the kids and doing other things, and it was terrible. It was a tremendous tool that I was able to use. And if you ever get to interview like a state trooper buddy of mine that I worked with for 20 years here in Massachusetts, he would tell you what a team we were between the drug task force, myself and my agents. We did a lot of good work, a lot of damage to the drug dealers. We didn't make their day; we ruined their day, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The left has really come after immigration and really battling the detainers. Most police departments, sheriff's departments do not accept detainers from ICE anymore. Exactly. They've really hammered out. We have a big case in Colorado that I've been working with now, where 4-time deported illegal alien. He's been deported 4 times, 4 DUIs. Just recently killed a mother and her son near a high school. He was driving 100 miles an hour drunk and crashed into them. 4 days earlier, he was released by a judge to the street and given work release. A lot of these judges, a lot of attorneys are coming in and pleading for their illegal immigrant clients to get lesser charges so it doesn't affect their immigration status at some point in time, which is ridiculous because a United States citizen having 4 DUIs wouldn't have got that same plea deal. They would have wound up in prison. Right. But here, an illegal alien, and ICE had put a detainer on him. The sheriff's department dropped the detainer and allowed this person to walk out on the street because they said that detainers don't contain a criminal warrant. We all know they don't contain a criminal warrant because it's a civil charge, and we should be allowed to use that civil authority to effectively work immigration cases, but they're not accepting that anymore.
I know, and it was effective, and it was super effective. I only had one judge didn't honor my detainer and release the guy, and this is the case. There were 2, I think, Algerians, North Africans. They were stabbing each other in the street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Sanctuary City place, and so I put detainers on both of them. They wound up releasing them. And told him to destroy my detainers. Judge Harrington, Cambridge District Court or something. And I'm thinking to myself, it's not like they were like shoplifters. I mean, these guys were carving each other up in the street. But that's what you deal with sometimes. I don't understand. I just don't understand the rationale now that you don't want to put people away. It isn't just immigration. It's all criminals throughout the country. You're not going to be charged with a felony unless it's over $1,000 or whatever the case may be.
Right.
These people have rap sheets as long as I am tall, and And I don't get it. It's disheartening. The border issues.
We're definitely making America less safe. 100%. 100%.
Yeah, definitely. And luckily, you and I, and we have our licenses to carry for life in every state. A lot of people don't have that luxury, and not that I want to do it, but it's nice to know we can, and at least protect ourselves, our families, and things like that. But yeah, I simply don't know what's going on now. But these other agencies, like my friend Mark Maron, State Trooper, Massachusetts, he'd be a great interview someday. So it might be worth the two of us, because he'll remember things we did. I mean, we went around. I don't know how much cocaine, how many Colombians we arrested, Jamaicans, drug dealers, U.S. citizens. I'd tag along and help, of course. But where they're getting their drugs from, so we'd follow the U.S. citizen to the source and then get the load at the house or whatever. And talking about Miami, before I leave Miami, because I jumped to Boston, but I worked with a customs agent Border Patrol agent in Miami, who went over to customs. The guy was unbelievable, and but during a 5-year period, we hit one house when he was a Border Patrol agent. We got like 1,000 kilos out of the house. And of course, then that house was seized and then sold at auction. Well, sure enough, Colombians buy the same house. 4 or 5 years later, went to the same house, got about another 1,000 kilos of cocaine out of that house. Now, I know that sounds like it's not true, but that was Miami. And I wound up stop telling people stories like that up here, because it would be nothing to get someone with 500,000 in their car, in their closet, in their trunk, or 500 kilos or 1,000 kilos. Those things happen, not on a daily basis, but that was Miami. And that was the entry point, and then it went all over the United States. But that guy was incredible, just an incredible agent. And
Awesome.
He passed away, but
Sorry to hear that.
Well, he had a good life.
Well, Kevin. Yeah, Kevin, we really appreciate you coming on the show. We'd love to have you back again.
Yeah.
We like to keep these podcasts a little bit short, for our listeners. But yeah,
2 hours, I understand.
But I'm sure everyone would listen to you for 2 hours. You've got some awesome stories. So I'm gonna let Mark Martinez close this out, and
Sure.
we are just really thankful for you coming on. Thank you for your service over the years to the United States, both in the Marine Corps and everything you did in federal law enforcement. We really appreciate you coming out. All right, John.
Thank you guys too, because I already got told. Greg Navarro, our mutual friend, already gave me 2 thumbs up on you guys. He'd be a great interview someday too, but he's kind of low key.
Thanks a lot, Kevin.
Kevin, thanks again a ton. And like I said, once we pick back up, we'll have to leave the wild west of Miami and head up to New England and actually see what's going on. I think a lot of people are starting to get that picture from Calexico to Miami. The border is not a fence, and obviously you didn't even have that going on. But the border is not from San Diego to Texas. It's all over the country where we're getting invaded from Canada, Puerto Rico, Florida, and here on the West Coast in these Ponga boats. But that's something we'll pick up next time we talk to you. But again, thank you so much for everything, and we'll talk to you soon.
Well, thank you for all you're doing, getting the word out, and appreciate your service. And everybody that's down on the border, I wish you well. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Kevin.